going to get up to 36 degrees Celsius much later this afternoon. But for this morning, we're enjoying the 28 degrees that the Almighty has blessed Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory, with. Good morning and welcome to Sunrise Daily this beautiful Friday morning. I'm Maukwe Ogun Yusuf.
Well, we have 29 degrees here at this moment. Don't worry, the rest of the day will take care of itself. Amaya Makinde, good morning and welcome to the show. Today is the 14th day in the month of March 2025, and it's countdown.
Countdown to what precisely?
No, Malcolm, please don't start. Don't start. Please, don't start. Let's just go on. Okay?
I'm not starting anything. I'm seeking clarity. But yes, I mean, it's remarkable. 2 weeks already in the month of March. I mean, who can believe it? But where we're taking you to this morning, if Lagos or Abuja are complaining about how hot it's going to get much later in the day, what would the people of Maiduguri say? They're going to be looking at 40 degrees much later this afternoon. But this morning, they're still keeping it cool at 30 degrees Celsius. Take a look at the city center, fully recovered after the floods of last year, which ravaged not just the city center, but the outskirts of Maiduguri as well. Maiduguri seems to be back on track, coming back to life after that major tragedy which befell the city. Well, I know that people like to talk about how hot it's been in recent times. Well, I think that this is something that the people who live in Maiduguri are already used to. I think that for each day that we wake up and we see the sun, they can complain about how hot it is, but it's sign that you're alive and it's reason to be grateful for another day. Ayo.
One of the things that came to my mind is, most of the time we look at the negative angle of stuff most of the time. However, can we at least be grateful for the present, for the opportunities that we have from time to time? There was a time, Maokwe, in our lives that Maiduguri didn't have this lush green look, even in the minds of people. When you heard the northern Nigeria or northern part of Nigeria, it was always all gory. And Maiduguri has recovered from so much over the years. But here we are now. Now Maiduguri is lush green and open for business, as you see, all peaceful and beautiful. And I also imagine someone from Maiduguri, Maokwe, looking at this scene and saying, wow, that's my city, that's my town, that's my state. Oh yes, we are proud of Maiduguri. We are proud of every city in Nigeria that we have to bring to you every morning. And this is a snapshot, just a bit, of the beautiful country called Nigeria. So take it in, the much you can.
Well, the matters which we'll bring to you much later today will be taking you from the northeast, yes, the aerial view which you're currently enjoying in the northeast of the country, to the south of the country. We just talked about how Maiduguri has recovered largely, not just from terrorism, which has ravaged it for many years, but also from a very deadly flood which ravaged it last year. And it seems to be coming back to life, that shows you the resilience of the city. Today we'll also be going to the south of the country, in particular to a town called Okuama, where last year 17 soldiers, including 4 officers, lost their lives. How are they faring? How is that community faring? Because clearly the wrath of the Nigerian military fell on it shortly after that particular incident, and was there for 40 days after. Investigations were carried out, and it doesn't appear that those investigations have now been made public. We'll be talking to people, well, we're going to be talking to one person from that particular committee, from that particular community, representing the voice of many people in the south region, particularly Okuama. In just a moment, when we come back from this break, please stay with us.
House turns its attention to the killing of 17 soldiers on the 14th of March 2024 in Okuama community in Ughelli, Delta State.
Concerned that since the unfortunate event happened, the perpetrators of the crime have not been arrested, thereby sending a wrong signal, especially in the light of many reports in the press last year, where the Chief of Defense Staff claimed that the military knows the perpetrators of this heinous act. The House is also concerned that several innocent citizens, indigenes of the community, including the President General of the community, Professor Arthur Ekpokpo, Chief Honorable Bervis Adogo, Mr. Dennis Amaka, Ms. Okuama Mabel, and Pa James Uhoro, who died in custody, among others, were detained and have since been in detention.
The House urges the Nigerian Army to release the investigative report from the incident and release the detained members of the community or charge them to court. The House also wants the Army to rebuild the homes destroyed by its men.
Well, that was a call by the House of Representatives a few days ago asking for the publishing of the investigation that was carried out by the Nigerian military a year ago into the activities that saw the death of 17 soldiers, including 4 officers. Well, this morning we have with us Professor Sunny Awefiada, who is a member of the World Council of Urhobo Professors and coordinator of Urhobo Historical Society. He joins us virtually all the way from Abraka. Prof, thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is 1 year after the killings in Okuama. We're all aware, well, I'm sure many Nigerians are aware of what happened shortly after that particular. As a matter of fact, a lot of Nigerians had their hearts in their mouths when they heard that 17 soldiers had been killed in a particular community, because they know what had befallen other communities in the past when such an incident happened in those places. And sadly, Okuama was no exception to what has now become like the norm when such an incident happens in a community. In spite of the callings and the pleas by many well-meaning people that the rule of law be followed. But can you tell us what it has been like in that community a year after this particular incident?
Thank you very much, Mokbe, for this memorialization of what happened at Okuama last year. 1 year after, it has been a tragedy of great proportion. Nobody anticipated what happened at Okuama. The incidents of March 14 that led to the death of the 17 officers of the Nigerian Army was never expected. And what followed the death of those soldiers, as you said, was what nobody expected, what we now call the punitive expedition, which was more or less like what happened to the Benin Kingdom under Oba Ogoranwe. 1 year after, Okuama is in rubbles. The people are scattered. A few of them are back home though, but life has never been the same prior to March 2014. So it has been a tragedy of immense proportions. Lives were lost, means of livelihood lost, families dispersed, people that probably will never meet again for as long as life endures. As we speak, people are trying to pick up the bits and pieces of their lives. But the reality is that things have never been the same again prior to March 2014. And you will recall that when that incident happened, the Urhobo people stood up in one accord to condemn the killing of those soldiers. And as much as we were able to do, we tried to explain to the Nigerian state that that thing was not perpetuated by the people of Okuama. And to get to the root of the matter, we were appealing that there should be an independent commission of inquiry, that only that can unravel what actually happened on the 14th of March. And if you recall again, the build-up to the 11th of Okuama, the military high command came up with a statement consistently that they knew those behind it and that the army was in hot pursuit of those who committed that heinous crime. So we're not thinking that Okuama will be spared. But just like every other community before Okuama, from UGEP 1975 in Cross Rivers, to OD 1999 in Bayelsa State, to Katsina Ala in Benue State 2001, Okuama was invaded by the Nigerian army and it was reduced to rubble. By the time the destruction was done, only one church was standing. And some of us saw that it was symbolic because the first Urobo Anglican bishop, late Bishop Agoriwe, came from Okuama. So at the end of the day, only that church, an Anglican church, was standing. So, as I said earlier, it has been a tragedy of immense proportion, a root shock to the Urobo nation. And we are still mourning. We are not just mourning for Okuama, we mourn with the families of the soldiers that lost their lives. We mourn in solidarity with the Nigerian army. We mourn in solidarity with the Nigerian state. And most significantly, we are still mourning with our people, the people of Okuama.
We do know that quite a number of, a series of incidents happened after that invasion, especially after the deaths of the soldiers. We know that the military, went to that community. They took residence. I mean, even I think the governor tried to intervene at that particular point. The military said they had it under control. They were in that community for 40 days, from what we understand. Now, many months have now since passed, and I want to imagine that perhaps, tensions have calmed, emotions must have cooled somewhat. Have there been any civil interventions on the part of government or civil society to interface with the Nigerian military to see precisely how it is that a resolution to what might be perceived as a hurt could be arrived at?
Okay, there were some intervention. For instance, the state government set up an IDP camp at a place called Ewu to take care of those that were displaced and those who had the courage to come out. Then I remember also that the Nigerian army also set up an investigative panel that sat in Warri. But many of us felt that it was wrong for the army to be a judge in its own case. And we all were calling on an independent commission of inquiry. Whatever name it is called, we do not mind, as long as it was an independent commission of inquiry. We are also aware that the Federal House of Representatives also set up a committee to investigate what happened. And of course, we were told that the Nigerian army refused to appear. They have been caused by civil society organizations, Urobo Progress Union, Urobo Historical Society, Urobo Renaissance Society, World Council of Urobo Professors, and many other organizations have also been calling for an independent commission of inquiry. But that has not been done. So we were thinking that for us to arrive at a closure, there should actually be an independent commission of inquiry.
Who do you think is best suited to set up this independent commission of inquiry?
Well, we have called on the federal government to do so. And then the membership should be independent-minded Nigerians. We can think of retired high court judges. We can think of civil society organizations. We can think about NGOs. Members of the armed forces can also be members of the commission of inquiry. A high-powered one that is truly independent in every sense of the word. And they should be given time to unravel what actually happened. I think after that, we should be able to discover the truth, and then we can think of attempt at rehabilitating Okuama, think about compensation, and every other thing that we know will bring closure to what happened. Not just to the Okuama community, not just to the Urobo nation, but also to the families of the soldiers and officers who lost their lives. So the federal government is in a position to actually set up an independent commission of inquiry to unravel what happened.
Tell us, though, I mean, shortly after, I'm sure that there must have been attempts to, pick back the pieces of what transpired in Okuama 1 year after. We know for a fact that 17 lives of soldiers, military men who have pledged their lives to serve this country, were lost. Do we know how many people lost their lives in Okuama?
Well, for now, we do not have the statistics. We were able to get out of the Nigerian army because they dominated the narrative. It's a government arm. Ours is a country where people play all sorts of tricks with statistics. For now, we do not know how many people lost their lives. But what Okuama was subjected to was reducing that community to rubble. It is, of course, we saw the videos the other time. We could probably compare it to the Gaza of Nigeria in 2024. At the time, some of us lamented that Okuama is no more. So the people are back, no doubt, trying to pick the bits and pieces of their lives, but things are not going to be the same again. And what we think will ameliorate what is going on right, the tension, the sense of loss, sense of misery, sense of tragedy, is again, I repeat, for the sake of emphasis, that independent commission of inquiry. That is the right way to go. So not only unraveling what happened, but also begin concrete measures at apprehending those behind what actually happened, and then meting out justice to those who deserve to be so treated.
To me, in all this conversation, Mr. Alfida, is that, I beg your pardon, Prof, is that 1 year after, no perpetrator has been identified. And I am always very boastful of my confidence in the capacity of the Nigerian intelligence community to know what they need to know at any given point in time. How does that come across to you, that we haven't been able to identify, or is it that we identified them, we have not been able to bring them forward, display them, or make them known to Nigerians that these are the perpetrators of this act 1 year after?
Well, it is unfortunate, and it beats many of us hollow, that 1 year after, the intelligence community has not been able to actually come up that this and this was what happened, and also apprehend the perpetrators. Let us go back, let's go down memory lane. When this happened, the Chief of Defense Staff mentioned a name, also mentioned a community. We thought that by now, all of that would have been resolved. Right now, what happened is the arrest and detention of some indigents of Okuama community. If you know the personalities in detention, you will certainly laugh a lot of things out of court. One of them is Professor Arthur Ekpepo, a professor of physics and former dean of a faculty in the university. Another one is an 80-year-old Pa James Ogoroko, who eventually died in military detention. One is Bevis Adobo. One is Dennis Okugbaye. One is Anthony Agum, and of course a woman, Rita Akata. So we are all confused that 1 year after, the intelligence community has not been able to reach a headway in identifying the real perpetrators of this and bringing them to book. It is quite unfortunate. And I should put it on record here that identifying the perpetrators and bringing them to book is a step towards closure. So we are waiting and hopeful that someday the intelligence community will be able to do the needful so that we can actually know those behind that heinous crime. So we are waiting.
So, Prof, just to be clear, the names you mentioned, you are not suspecting them of being perpetrators or contributors to the act, are you?
Well, those who are arrested in the army has not charged them to court. The first thing I mentioned, the professor, is the president general of the community. Then I was talking of an 80-year-old man. You think an 80-year-old man can carry a gun and attack soldiers? And these names I mentioned, let me say something about the Yoruba people and the Okuama people. We do not have a history of taking arms against the Nigerian state. We do not have a history of attacking men of the armed forces. There is a saying and a thinking among the Yoruba people that just a uniform of a soldier hung somewhere is enough to confer sanctity on that place. We do not. We respect our soldiers, whether they are Air Force, Navy, Army. We respect them so much. We do not subvert the state. So that has been, so let them check. Okay. If there has been any incident of the people attacking personnel of the Nigerian Army, I do not think it has ever happened among the Urobo people. That is to the extent we hold the military and the Nigerian state in high premium. You will recall once upon a time the Niger Delta crisis. What the Urobo people do, despite all of the oppression we have faced, was to intellectually engage the Nigerian state. What some of us now call, in quote, intellectual militancy. This manifests in writing, in poetry, in drama, in prose, in debates and lectures, but not in bringing down personnel of the Nigerian military, which we consider as subversion. So these people that were arrested, even if they are being considered as suspects, they should be handed over to the police and be charged to court. So as far as we are concerned, as much as they have not been convicted, they are still innocent. And we feel that they have been held for too long. They were arrested between 18th and 20th of August. This is March. This is probably more than half a year since they have been incarcerated. And as I said earlier, one of the 80-year-old man, he died in military detention. So we are thinking that these people should be released. Charge them to court.
Okay, that point we believe, Prof, has been substantially, made. But I don't know if you want to tell us what the current status of the disposed residents of Okuama are, and if there's been any overtures by any authority of government at the federal, state, or local level to rebuild the destroyed community.
Yes, the state government, as I said earlier, built and set up an IDP camp in Ewu, which is the central headquarters of the people from that area. Then the camp was run for some months or so before it was shut down in December. Then the people, those who were still willing to go back, went back to Okuama. An attempt is also being made to see if there is structures can be put in place for the people to find new homes in Okuama, but that is not enough. We were thinking that by now, the federal government would have started something by way of rehabilitating the community and those that were lost. Because we should always think about history. You recall that after OD was devastated, the Federal High Court awarded 37 billion naira against the federal government. And federal government negotiated for 15 billion naira. Katsina Allah, a federal high court also awarded 8 billion naira against the federal government. So we are thinking that before the federal government should be dragged to court, it should begin something towards rehabilitating Okuama community. Federal government should come to that community and rebuild the community, because an arm of the federal government, Nigerian Army, laid that community to waste. Federal government should come there and rebuild Okuama. The people need new homes. They need hospitals. They need schools. They need markets. And we are calling that federal government should pay Okuama a compensation of 150 billion naira to remedy all that happened. The federal government should also set up a university, specifically a University of Wetland Studies, so that what happened in Okuama can be seen, despite its tragic content, as maybe a step towards a transformation that will be holistic, not just for Okuama, not just for Robo, not just for Niger Delta, but for the entire Nigerian nation. So we are appealing that the federal government should take these steps so that people can actually return back to life as it is. Even though we must make the point clear that all of this cannot quantify the lives that were lost. The lives of the soldiers, and that of the people, the disruption that took place. But this will be more or less steps that will lead towards closure, and for the people to once again have confidence in the Nigerian state.
You know, Prof, one other issue that comes to mind is, before we even got here, there are those who have said over time that this was avoidable. So one would wonder why, for instance, the crisis was allowed to escalate, including neighboring communities like Igbo, which of course led to the deaths and destructions we've had. And in your opinion, and from your experience, what you know of the people, what measures have been taken to prevent a recurrence?
Well, this is why we need that commission, independent commission of inquiry, so that holistically we can engage with all that took place. Yes, the communities in that neighborhood of Koloba and Okuama, they've always had their differences, but it never escalated. We were aware that local governments, Ugele South and Boma local government, where the two communities are located, were doing their best to contain the crisis. The Delta state government also set up a committee that looked into this crisis. And I should make the point that intercommunal crises have always existed all over Nigeria and beyond. So we do not understand what happened, because I do not want to go into guesswork or surmises or speculations. We do not understand what actually happened that led to the death of 17 soldiers, with the consequences of leveling Okuama. So to understand all of this and forestall future occurrences, we once again call for that independent commission of inquiry, so that we can actually know what happened and see how these things can be prevented. I repeat, these intercommunal crises have always been there, and they have always been managed. If not for the 17 soldiers that were killed, I do not think that the world outside Delta ever heard of a conflict between Okuama and Okoloba. So these things have always been there. And even before government intervention, the communities had their own mechanism for settling conflict. So once again, we need that independent commission of inquiry, not only to unravel these things, to also put up ways, means that will lead to preventing all of these things that happen. So that many of us think is the way forward.
Well, Prof, I don't know whether, you know, because you have called for the release of those who have lost, beg your pardon, those who were arrested by the Nigerian army and are still in detention 1 year after. Is the Okuama community looking also perhaps to approach the judiciary for a look into this?
Yes, we have been making a call for the umpteenth time, again and again, that Professor Ato Ekmepo, Professor of Physics, former Dean Faculty of Science, will be released. We made the call that Pa James Ogoroko, who eventually died in detention, to be released. We made the call that Belvis Adobu should be released. We made the call that Dennis Okugbaye should be released. We made the call that Anthony Agumunia should be released. We also made the call that that woman, Mrs. Rita Akata, should also be released. We made these calls again and again. And you recall that even the king of Ewu, the OV of Ewu, hence we're comparing the punitive expenditure of Okuama to that of the Benin Empire under Avorame. The OV of Ewu was declared wanted, and with all monarchical dignity, he surrendered himself, and he was taken into custody until people of goodwill reached out, clamored for his release, and His Royal Majesty was let off the hook. So we have also been making the call. Many organizations, Urhobo Renaissance Society, Urhobo Historical Society, what I'm doing now is also an advocacy that these people should be released. Charge them to court if need be. Let the police do its work. So that is where we are. We need to put measures in place to forestall these kind of things. As I said earlier, we mourn with the families of those who lost those soldiers. We mourn with the Nigerian army, the Nigerian state, and of course, our brothers and sisters in Okuama. And we are calling on the federal government to do the needful. Come to the aid of Okuama. We are asking. Some people have also gone to court. I know some interested people, they've gone to court. The thing is before the competent court of law. So that is there. But again, beyond what the court will do and all other factors, let the federal government begin to rebuild Okuama. Let the federal government pay compensation 150 billion naira. The federal government will establish a university of wetlands. Where Okuama is a gateway to all of the Niger Delta. So setting up a university of wetlands there will do the Niger Delta and the Nigerian nation a lot of good, so that we can put this incident behind us.
All right,
and
Prof.
Look at, yes.
Well, we sincerely hope that, your calls and your pleas are listened to, especially since it's been 1 year after. But we have to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Professor Sonny Awefada is the member, World Council of Urhobo Professors, and also the coordinator, Urhobo Historical Society. Thank you so much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, we'll take a break at this moment and we'll be back shortly to look at another matter of another place. Well, it's our country in general, but places, which have experienced terrorism and are recovering from it in our country over the years. Please stay with us. Well, right now we're turning our attention to the state of terrorism, and only this week the Global Terrorism Index for 2025 was released by the Institute of Economics and Peace, and it does appear that there's been some news to mull over, in that particular report. Some people, they see good things, they also see bad things. I'm going to be speaking this morning with Mr. Kabiru Adamu, who is a global, beg your pardon. Yeah, I know you're going to go global soon, or if you're not global already. Yes, but he's a security expert. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on Sunrise Daily.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
I'd like to know, the Global Terrorism Index is out, and a lot of people have been poring over the pages of this, report, and quite a number of them have seen both good things and bad things. Good things in the sense that Nigeria seems to be faring better than it has over the last couple of years, but bad things in the sense of the threats that are still very prevalent around terrorism. What's your take on the latest report?
The most important thing is the attention that the report has received. The fact that terrorism still remains a challenge, and like the report indicated, it's expanding into more countries. The fact that of the 10 most affected countries, I think about 5, 6 of them within the African sub-region, especially the West African sub-region. The fact that the Sahel region, unfortunately, remains or has emerged as the most affected terrorism challenged region in the world. The fact that groups affiliated with jihadist groups around the world that are affiliated to the two franchises, Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, still remain in the forefront of the terrorism challenge. The pathway to radicalization, which they mentioned, that individuals who become radicalized do so more speedily than they used to in the past. The fact that in Europe, as an example, group terrorism has declined, and what we're seeing is individual terrorism. So these are some of the things that I would say is quite instrumental in the counter-terrorism effort that the world has attempted to over the last few years. The fact that after spending so much money, so much effort, we're still dealing with this challenge.
It does appear that terrorism is here to stay, sadly.
Sadly.
And worrisomely so. I do know that, within the quarters of the Nigerian military, there's been some excitement, so to speak, or maybe not excitement. I'm looking for, will I say, some positivity. I think maybe that's a better word to use, because it does appear that Nigeria, as I said earlier, was faring better. And maybe what it points to is that we're doing a little more, in trying to curb terrorism back at home, or at least we're able to, reduce the number of fatalities that are, resulting from terrorism. However, given all the other indexes, I mean, you've talked about how the Sahelian region is still at the very front, the fast speed of radicalization, is there really much to be positive about?
Definitely. So the report, as you know, is a review of what happened in 2024 that was analyzed, and then the report released. So in 2026, God willing, they would review 2025 and then report it in the index. Now, what it showed in Nigeria is a 38% decrease in incidents. And that's something to be happy about. Sadly, unfortunately, however, in spite of the 38% decrease, we saw a 6% rise in fatality.
In fatalities.
Yeah. So what the report is saying is less incidents, but then the impact of those incidents have increased. So we're seeing now more mass fatality incidents. So one incident, they gave the example of an incident in Yobe State in 2024 that led to the death of about 120 persons, just one incident. What also came out clearly in that report is the shift from military effort, which is the kinetic effort, to the non-kinetic effort. In other words, of all the recommendations they gave, and for me that's the most important aspect of that report, the last paragraph of the section of Nigeria provided some recommendations, and they did not refer to kinetic effort, which tells me that they are happy with the kinetic effort. They referred to other things outside the kinetic effort. In other words, you're doing fine, the military is doing excellently well, and anyone who is in Nigeria knows the military is doing well. They're taking out the commanders, they're destroying supply chain, that helps the terrorist groups, and several other things. But they are advising that we should shift focus from perhaps maintain the kinetic effort, but then also shift focus to the non-kinetic effort. In the course of the conversation, maybe we'll look at those non-kinetic efforts. But for me, that's the most significant effort. I think there is enough in that report for the military to be happy. But more importantly, our politicians, especially those who are driving the coordinating elements within the national security architecture, need to look carefully at some of the recommendations in that report.
Indeed, I think one of the things that also stood out in the report, I mean, talking about non-kinetic efforts, is the fact that they talk about how terrorism is influenced, particularly in the Sahelian region, influenced by bad governance, pastoral conflicts, and all the other things
Mining,
around.
as an example.
Yeah, so these are the things that are affecting, terrorism, the rise of terrorism in the Sahelian region, and
so in Nigeria specifically, they refer to the socioeconomic conditions. They believe that the socioeconomic conditions is allowing recruitment, and the oxygen that allows terrorism to thrive is rooted in these socioeconomic conditions. If the groups are able to recruit, if they're able to get fuel for their vans to, power whatever it is, factories they have for making bombs and all of that, if they're able to incentivize people with little money to go, and do whatever terrorist activities they want, then they will continue to operate. If they're able to get weaponry from across the border or from wherever it is they're getting those weaponry, then they would continue to carry that. So those socioeconomic conditions, and we are all living witnesses to the fact that the socioeconomic conditions in Nigeria have deteriorated. So they are actually saying we should look closely at that. They also, interestingly, talked about Operation Safe Corridor. Operation Safe Corridor, as you know, is the de-radicalization component of the counter-terrorism strategy that we're pursuing. They are commending it. They're saying we should actually expand it because it's a pathway to, reduce the terrorism challenge, as it were. Interestingly, even though they didn't mention the Borno model, but then they talked about pathways to peace. And for me, that's the only model that we have at the moment. The Borno model is instrumental, as it were, to the surrendering of more than 120,000 both members and families of the two terrorist groups. And then the last point which they mentioned, which is also quite instrumental, is the infighting between the two groups. Now, whether that is a strategy or it's just repentance, we should be happy about it. Before, the enemy was facing us. Now they are fighting among themselves, and it's leading to more deaths. In fact, about 60% of the deaths associated with terrorism was actually because of that infighting. So there is a lot to be happy, actually, in that that report.
Well, maybe that accounts for why, when you look at the deaths that they're reporting, over 500 deaths, 580-something people lost their lives. You're wondering, but we didn't see that many people reported as a result of terrorism. Kidnapping, banditry, perhaps. Maybe that explains it. But, it's still something that we need to be very concerned about. Terrorism, because as you said, we have the border, and I think right now the military can be happy. The politicians clearly have their work cut out for them, don't they?
They do. So we have three instruments that we use in the country for counterterrorism. The National Counterterrorism Strategy, which is domiciled in the Office of the National Security Advisor. It was launched in 2016. Then the Policy Framework on Countering Violent Extremism, which was launched in 2017, also domiciled in the Office of the National Security Advisor. And then the last one is the Terrorism Prohibition and Prevention Act, as amended in 2022. Now, and the custodian of that document, as it were, is a national document, but the Attorney General of the Federation, I guess, is the arrowhead for the implementation of that. Now, all of these three documents, the prefix associated with them says national. And a point I'm trying to make is, it's not a military thing. It should be an all of society and all of government and actually all of nation thing. And I think that is where the deficiency is. Mokwe, I doubt if you go to the market today, and let's say the leader of ISWAP appears in a market, I doubt if a lot of Nigerians will be able to recognize him. And more importantly, I doubt if they know the number to call to say, hey, this is the leader of ISWAP. So that's the deficiency. We've not done much in terms of making Nigerians aware of the contents of these three instruments. Just last week, I think about 17 individuals and a company, including the Lakura group, were designated terrorists. Most Nigerians don't even know that we have a sanctions committee that is chaired by the Attorney General of the Federation, whose responsibility it is to facilitate the naming and sanctioning of groups and individuals. So those are the deficiencies. How do we take these instruments that, in fact, are due for a review? Something that was launched in 2016, 2017, by now so many things would have emerged. Cyber crime, the pathway to radicalization that I talked about is actually through the cyberspace. So those documents need to be updated, and more importantly, they need to be taken from the shelves where they are, down to the market woman, down to the media, down to you and I, so that we are the owners of the document. We support their implementation. The oxygen that allows terrorism to thrive, those things that I mentioned earlier on, that we are the ones to block them. It's not actually the federal government. Terrorism happens at the granular level. So we need to take those documents down to the granular level, let the state governors know about them, let them embrace them, let their policies reflect the contents of those documents, let the emerging local government chairman that we want to grant autonomy, let them understand the contents of those documents, so that policies that they come up with also are reflected as part of those three documents. Right now, unfortunately...
Now maybe perhaps to the NOA, because the NOA has been doing some work in that regard, trying to let Nigerians know what their rights and responsibilities are. Yeah. But I do know that Ayo also has questions for you. Ayo.
Thank you, Mokwe. Perhaps in the same vein, but let's begin here, Mr. Adamu. The military put out a statement condemning, casting doubts on the credibility of this report that we are discussing. But what's your take on the military's dismissal of this report?
There are two sides. So the spokesman of the DHQ, when he was asked, did cast doubt on it. But then I remember the Chief of Defense Staff did acknowledge the progress, and in his words said, what happened yesterday, where we are, and then we should be looking at tomorrow. In other words, from that policy point of view, I think he acknowledged the progress that is made in that report. I'm not sure why the spokesperson of the DHQ responded in the manner that he responded. But I think what is more important is for the DHQ, the military, to sit down and have a look at the content of that report. In other words, analyze it in the manner that we've just done, to see the areas where it has made progress. And I mean, point I've made since I started this conversation is that it is not the responsibility of the military alone to address the terrorism challenge. They are one component out of the about 29 ministries, departments, and agencies that we have. So perhaps the coordinating element within our national security sector, you know, the Office of the National Security Advisor. Remember, we have a coordinator counter-terrorism in that office. And then, of course, the Ministers of Defense, Ministers of Interior, and Police Affairs, and to an extent, the Attorney General of the Federation and the Presidency, perhaps should, you know, come together, look at that report, see the good things in it, and then, of course, the few bad things that are in there, try to contextualize them and see if we need to make any changes. But on the whole, I think the military should be happy with the effort they've made. There is a graph, a very interesting one. I wish your team would show that graph. In that report, it showed where we were in 2007, and then how it peaked around 2011 up until 2013, exactly this graph. You can see how it peaked around 2013, 2014, and then you can see the decline. So the military should be happy about this achievement that it has made. As a country, we shouldn't be happy. I think about 11,000 to 13,000 persons have died over this period, and in no way should we be happy about that. But in terms of the decline, as this graph, this linear graph shows, we should be happy, and the military should be happy about it as well.
You know, for me, one of the other issues is, at the end of the day, it all boils down to the granular, which is the people. And it boils down to the local communities. Because when we're talking about terrorism, well, even though there may be domestic or local terrorism, it's usually something that is imported, that comes from outside. So it's those people that I'm thinking we should be giving a little more attention. Yes, you're right, we have made significant progress. I mean, if you saw, there's another graph that I saw, the figures in 2015, 2014, and even I think 2015, 2016, they were humongous, horrible figures. But now, it's the lowest we have ever seen. And yes, I agree, the military should be celebrating. But at the end of the day, it comes back to people. It comes back to human beings. It comes back to whatever it is that we set up to ensure that these things don't continue. How do you see us doing that? There are those who would preach, look, let's talk about patriotism. Maybe that will help us to own the process more and more. What is your take on how we communicate to the Nigerian, to the local Nigerians in the rural areas about these important conversations?
Mentioning the three instruments that we have: the National Counterterrorism Strategy, the Policy Framework on Countering Violent Extremism, and then the Terrorism Prohibition and Prevention Law as amended in 2022. Now, in these three instruments, there are components of de-radicalization and counter-radicalization. There are components of strategic communication. And like I inferred earlier on, the challenge is that we've left more or less these documents to be gathering dust in the Nigerian parlance on shelves. We've not taken those documents down to the subnationals, down to the even local governments. And more importantly, if you pick one of the documents, the Policy Framework on Countering Violent Extremism, it identified different groups, market groups, student, youths, name them. Everyone has a role as identified in those documents. But sadly, we're not seeing that. The level of engagement has been extremely low. I know there is a strategic communication committee that meets under the auspices of the Office of the National Security Advisor, but we're not seeing the effort and the result of that. So I think that's the way to go. The whole of government should come together, and all the various information instruments that the government has, the Ministry of Information, the National Orientation Agency, the media as a group. You recall this particular National Security Advisor, I remember him going to, I can't remember the exact state, but somewhere in the south, it could have been Akwa Ibom, when he met I think, Guild of Editors, and made a powerful speech. That was immediately after he was appointed. I thought it was a way of engaging with the editors and publishers in a manner that would allow to help in this strategic communication. So I think that's the way to go. Those three documents, those three instruments that I've mentioned, which, by the way, are due for review, we need to break them down so that the average Nigerian understands their content and is able to support in their implementation. It's not really the role of the government to do that. It's all for us Nigerians, and it's only if we're introduced to them and we know the content that we can support them. So again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
But in the context of the world and looking at terrorism globally and the fact that it's still on the rise, and we have had, or we now have more conflicts than we have had since the end of World War II, what would you be saying to us and to other countries, especially in Africa, which seems to be a weak point, which seems to be suffering the biggest brunt of terrorism? What would you be saying to us as a continent?
So the report identified two reasons for the rise, as it were, in conflicts around the world. Weakness of institutions, interestingly, Mokwe. And then the second one, unfortunately, is the issue around socioeconomic conditions that are driving. And for me also instrumentally is the extractive industry challenge. Now, when you pick all of these three reasons or factors that they've identified, they are domiciled in Africa, as it were. There is no part of Africa, perhaps maybe only South Africa to an extent, is not affected as much by these three instruments. So my message to Africa is to be the man in the mirror situation. Let's be truthful to ourselves. Are we managing our conflicts in the manner that we need to manage them? A silver lining is emerging from Senegal. Most of us did not take notice of that. The Casamance crisis that has been ongoing for decades, a peace deal was signed recently. And why? Because the current president took a different approach. Instead of the adversarial approach, he sat down with them, signed an agreement, and now they're enjoying peace. And of course, that peace would lead to some form of economic growth for that country because of the resources in the Casamance. So maybe we need to sit down and, like I said, be the man in the mirror, be truthful to ourselves. What level of lack of engagement has led to the conflicts that we have? The Farmer-Hada violence, as an example. At what point did that violence degenerate or morph to what it is at the moment? What are the reasons that led to the morphing of that? So our approach needs to change. The institutions that are responsible for addressing those challenges that frankly have failed, I don't know how to put it better than that. They failed. We need to look at that. How do we strengthen those instruments? How do we make sure? Today in Nigeria, we have ungoverned spaces, whether we want to admit it or not. But there are responsible government institutions for addressing those ungoverned spaces. And what are we doing about it? Nothing. So that's the point. We need to actually look at ourselves in the mirror, tell ourselves the truth, identify those weak points as noted in that report, and then correct them.
Well, we have to thank you very much for your thoughts. You've certainly given us something to think about for the weekend. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Mr. Kabiru Adamu is a global security expert. Thank you once more.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, we'll turn our attention now to a particular letter which is now making the rounds this time around. It's said to be from the office of the governor and has been signed by the governor of Rivers State. This letter was cited also by our correspondent. The letter indicates the interest of the governor of Rivers State to submit the budget to the Rivers State House of Assembly on Wednesday, the 19th of March this year. They're looking at 11 a.m. That letter, as I did say earlier, was signed by the governor of the state. Now, whether this letter will be formally acknowledged by the Rivers State House of Assembly remains to be seen. And whether the request of the governor will be granted also remains to be seen. But just to say again that the governor of Rivers State is said to have written a letter to the Rivers State House of Assembly led by Right Honorable Martin Chike Amewule, indicating his interest to submit a budget for 2025 before the Rivers State House of Assembly on the 19th of March this year by 11 a.m. We'll wait to see the reaction of that from the Rivers State House of Assembly. But that's where we wrap up the program this beautiful Friday morning. We hope that you have a wonderful day. I'm Maupe Ogunyese.
Interestingly, Maupe, that letter also says, well, in case there's any other date convenient for the Speaker and the House of Assembly before the end of March, he was also open to it. Well, as you said, we'll wait for the acknowledgement. Amaya Makinde, you have a wonderful rest of your weekend.